Hello, everybody. Here we got in Emerging World Power, Chapter 21, years 1890 to 1918. This is going to be a huge chapter. There is a lot of information that is going on in this chapter, so bear with us and let's get started. Now, expansion to imperialism. This idea of expansion is exactly what it sounds. America wants to expand to other territories, and the act of expanding and taking over other territories is going to be known as imperialism. Now, there's some foundations of empire. You have Seward and Lincoln and Johnson. Their big ideas was access to global markets is the key. Sorry, that key should be scooted over a little bit. Is the key to power. So the more places we have to sell and buy goods means the more power we as a country will have. We wanted to avoid socialism and Marxism by creating things in America and selling overseas. Those are political philosophies that were over in Russia and Soviet Union, that type of land, China. And so we wanted to avoid those. And by making our own things, we are able to do that. We also wanted to proselytize overseas, the Anglo-Saxons, this idea of the white man or religion, Christian religions is superior. In the 1890s, Secretary of State Richard Oley established the Monroe Doctrine and basically says, the Monroe Doctrine, we're going to deal with our own countries, our neighbors, and everybody else needs to stay out of it. So here we have a little map of that. Okay, here we have the Monroe Doctrine line, North America, South America, big stop sign. Europe over here says, what do you mean by off limits? We're telling Europe and those countries, you know what? This is our land. You cannot come over. You cannot colonize. You cannot take over. America is going to deal with North and South America. Now we get the War of 1898. Spain is a country over there in Europe, right? And we have this Monroe Doctrine. We also have this idea of imperialism. And so Spain is controlling Cuba. Cuba is south of modern-day Florida. Cuba attempted a war against Spain to try to gain their independence. Spain killed 200,000 Cubans through starvation, exposure, dysentery, which is a disease. And so the U.S. said, hey, their fight for independence is like our American Revolution, our fight for independence. So what we are going to do is we are going to help them out. So what we do is we go down, we park some boats, we send some soldiers and different things. And one of our boats, the USS Maine, blows up in Havana Harbor. Now we're in Cuba. Spain is controlling Cuba. We're helping Cuba fight Spain. So now all of a sudden our boat blows up. Who are we going to blame? Hopefully you said Spain, not Cuba, because remember we're helping the Cubans beat off the Spanish. So that's right. We blame Spain, and now we are in the middle of this war. But actually, if we jump forward in history, they go and look at the boat and realize the engine blew up. So we went to this war over this boat that blew up. And at the time we thought, hey, Spain blew it up, but really the boat blew itself up. But you have William Randolph Hearst. He is a journalist. He owns a newspaper. And you get this idea, this philosophy in journalism called yellow journalism. And one of his big pushes during this time was something called Remember the Maine. It's an easy little quote, an easy saying where people can say, hey, remember what happened to that boat, the USS Maine in Cuba? We need to go fight. So he wanted a war because if there's a war, it's going to sell newspapers. President McKinley said, if we intervene in Cuba in the name of civilization and in behalf of endangered American interests, also known as the sugar plantation. So we wanted to get involved in this war. We wanted Spain to leave. We wanted Cuba to look to us as their protectorate, their big brother protecting them, so that we could ultimately expand and have more control. So here we have a picture of the USS Maine exploding. Now this is an example of yellow journalism. As we can see here, we can see the explosion right around here. But if we look up here, we can see all those people flying. Now, in reality, did the soldiers really fly up there? No, but it's this idea of yellow journalism. Yellow journalism is exaggerating the truth, and that's exactly what's happening here. Now, here we have Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Riders. He stormed up San Juan Hill. This is what really made him famous. If you're familiar with the movies Night at the Museum, this is the Teddy Roosevelt that they have in there. This is William Randolph Hearst Castle that he built in California, kind of central California. He made so much money off selling newspapers that he built himself this nice, modest castle. Now, the War of 1898, the U.S. Navy ultimately takes Manila, which is in the Philippines, so now the Philippines is ours. 1887, America gets land in Hawaii. In the 1890s, I'm just going to call her Queen Lily. Queen Liliuokalani, Queen Lily, is not happy with America and our involvement in Hawaii. We don't have Hawaii at this time in the late 1800s. So America took over Guam, Puerto Rico, all these because our boats needed places to go get coal. Eventually, we're also going to take over Hawaii. And on July 1st, 1898, first battle in Cuba. A few days later, the Spanish surrender. So we've gained the Philippines. We're getting a stronghold in Hawaii. We've taken over Guam, Puerto Rico. We've taken over Cuba. Here we have Queen Lily and her leadership is not a fan of what America is doing. Now, Spain cedes, or they give up Puerto Rico and Guam. But what about the Philippines? Well, McKinley said this. He said, "We cannot leave the Filipinos to themselves. They were unfit for self-rule." What a great president, right? Sarcasm there. Can you imagine a president saying, "Oh, these people, these poor people, they're not fit to control themselves, so we need to step in, this big country that we are, and we need to help them out." Well, that's exactly what he did. So Jane Addams, the whole house, Mark Twain, author and Gilded Age, Andrew Carnegie, gave $20 million for independence, Samuel Gompers. These were people that were fighting for the cause. Now, the United States is going to annex or give up the Philippines, but there was a man by the name of Emilio Aguinaldo who claimed independence, so we had to go fight against him and his crew. The fighting was worse there in Cuba. By 1902, fighting is over. In 1902 in Cuba, we signed something known as the Platt Amendment, which says, Cuba, you can only make treaties with America, or you can only be friends with America. It also gives America the right to get involved whenever we see fit in Cuban problems. So if you have a problem, we are going to be there and take over. And it also gives us a portion of the land for a military base, which is going to be Guantanamo Bay, which is still there to this day. Now, here we have Uncle Sam rolling up his sleeves. Sure, Cuba, you have rights. There's a lot of sarcasm there with the Platt Amendment and what it gives in the way of rights to America over Cuba. Now, we're also going to get involved with Asia a little bit. In 1899, we're going to institute what's known as the open door policy, where all nations have equal trade access in China. So China has kind of been limiting themselves, and we're going to say, nope, everybody gets equal trade. Now, why would America come in, or who gives America the right to come into China and tell China who they need to be partners with? America does. We are very full of ourselves, very proud of ourselves at this time period, and we come in and tell everyone else what to do. Japan and Russia are in a war. Japan beats Russia in 1905. Roosevelt wins the Nobel Peace Prize because he helps get peace there. America supported China in its desire to gain independence from Japan in 1911. So 1911, get this straight, we're friends with Japan. We helped Japan gain freedom and independence. 30, 40 years later, World War II, they're blowing us up and we're blowing them up. Here we have China, and we can see right in the middle there is the entrance way to China. And America is standing there, kind of like the bodyguard. We have the key, the doors are open, and all those other men with their hats are representing other countries and their involvement in China. Now, the United States and Latin America. So this idea of expansionism and imperialism, we are expanding out. We are taking control. We are the big boy in the block, and we want everything to go our way. So Teddy Roosevelt said that you speak softly and carry a big stick. That is, the big stick is going to be the Navy. So it's this saying where we're going to tell you what to do, and if you don't listen, we're going to come in with our military and we're going to take care of business. Teddy Roosevelt, $10 million and $250,000 a year to Colombia for land in Panama. Panama is controlled by Colombia. Colombia does not like this idea where America comes in and says, we want this land because we want to build a canal, which is ultimately going to be the Panama Canal. Colombia says no. Roosevelt says some choice words, and he is not happy. But ultimately, we are going to help Panama overthrow Colombia, thanks to America. And by doing that, Panama is going to say, sure, America, you can come build the Panama Canal. And in 1914, we get the Panama Canal. Now, what we did is we went in and we said, hey, Panama, if you get a bunch of soldiers, we're going to park a nice big boat right here by Panama. And if Colombia tries to attack you, we will blow them up. And when the Panamanians went in to attack Colombia, our boat was there. Colombia decided not to, and they ultimately gained their independence. Now, we also get something else known as the Roosevelt Corollary, which allows for America to be the police of all the Caribbean. We are going to get involved with all these islands. We're going to tell them what to do, and people are going to just say yes. By 1913, President Wilson says never again seek one additional foot of territory by conquest. So we are limiting our expansion and imperialism. Here we have Teddy Roosevelt speaking softly and carrying his big stick. And sorry, here we have the Panama Canal. It's connecting the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. They basically build a river through the country of Panama, and they built these things called locks, which are kind of like an elevator for boats. And here you have Teddy Roosevelt, the big stick in the Caribbean Sea. So you can see around the edge, you have Venezuela, Panama, Mexico, Santo Domingo, all those different countries. And we are patrolling our boats, collecting debts and all these different things, being their police officers, keeping them safe, but also expecting things in return. Now, the United States and Latin America, specifically Mexico, between 1870 and 1900, you have a dictator by the name of Dictator Diaz. He's friendly to American companies, so he's nice. But by early 1900s, Diaz becomes afraid of the power that these American companies have built up and established. So what he starts to do is he starts to nationalize the plantations, mines, and oil fields. Basically, he forces the government of Mexico to take over these American businesses down there, and America's not happy. So American companies, they start to back a new leader. His name is Francisco Madero. 1911, Diaz resigns and Madero takes over, but then Madero is murdered in 1913. Carranza takes over. And so within just a few short years, you have a big supporter of America to being not a supporter of America, to America putting a new one in. He gets murdered, then another one. So there's a lot of problems and change going on in Mexico in early 1900s. By 1916, there was a man by the name of Pancho Villa. He did not like America. He had a lot of problems with what we were doing. So he came into a part of America in the United States, killed 16, raids Columbus, New Mexico. There's 11,000 soldiers that are on the lookout for Pancho Villa. And basically we occupy northern Mexico. Mexicans want them gone. Everybody calms down. But America has intentions to still police and be the boss over the Caribbean, Central America, and Mexico. So that's what we continue to do. So here we have Pancho Villa. Here we have a wanted poster for him. Now, switching gears. We're going to now start getting involved in World War I. Now, from neutrality to war, there was something called the Triple Alliance, which involved Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. They were one posse. They were one group. On the other side, you had the Triple Entente, which is Britain, France, and Russia. And America is ultimately going to join the Triple Entente. 1914, you have a man by the name of Gavrilo Princip, who assassinates the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand, next leader, people in Sarajevo don't like him. He shows up, and they ultimately kill him. So here you have the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Here you have Gavrilo Princip. So what I call is this is a domino theory. So kind of follow along with me. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. Then Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Serbia is friends with Russia, so Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Now, once Russia is in the war, Germany is friends with Austria-Hungary, so Germany declares war on Russia. France was Russia's ally, so when Germany declared war on Russia, France declared war on Germany. The German army invaded Belgium on its way to attack France, so Belgium is friends with Great Britain, so Great Britain declares war on Germany. Now, all of these countries get involved in the war very quickly, one with another. And it is called the domino effect. So here you can kind of see it. You have the red, the Triple Entente. America is going to eventually get involved in that. Then you have the Triple Alliance, which is there in blue, and they're going to be involved together as well. So here you have some propaganda posters. The Allies onward to victory. You can see all the countries here. The countries here who are supporting each other. Here you have another one. Serbia says, if you touch me, I'll Austria. If you make a move, I'll Russia. If you hit that little fellow, I'll Germany. If you strike my friend, I'll. If you hit my friend, I'll. So it's just one after another. These people started fighting. This is probably one of my most favorite political cartoons of all time. Just want you to spend a few seconds and go ahead and look at it. Now, in those 10 seconds, hopefully you were able to see it's called The Crime of the Ages, Who Did It. You're able to see a bunch of pointing fingers. You can see Germany right there in the middle pointing at Russia. Russia's pointing at Austria. Austria and Serbia are pointing at each other. France and Belgium and England are pointing at Germany. Italy's just over there with its arm folded, not really sure. But in the back, we can see the peace of Europe and that there is a sword right in their heart. So here you have everybody blaming each other for World War I. Now, eventually people are going to go from being neutral, not involved, to full-on war. So you have some new weapons. You have long-range, high-velocity rifles. You have the introduction of the machine gun, which can shoot a lot of bullets very quickly. You have this idea of trench warfare, where you dig down into the dirt and you basically pop up every once in a while, you shoot, and then you go back. And you pop up and you shoot and you go back. The Battle of Verdun in 1916, because of trench warfare, the Germans lost 450,000, the French had 550,000. Massive amounts of soldiers, and it slows the war down. President Wilson in the United States, said America is neutral in fact as well as in name. Basically, he's saying we're not going to get involved. But we have been, and we are. Between 1914 and 1916, we started to trade more with Britain and France. So even though we're not involved, we're giving them trade, meaning weapons, guns, clothes, all those sorts of things. Germany has U-boats. These are old school submarines. And in 1915, Britain or allies would be sunk, is what Germany says. And so one boat that gets sunk is called the Lusitania. And with this Lusitania being sunk, 128 Americans die. America is not happy about all this. All these things are the dominoes for America to get involved in the war. Another thing that's going to get America involved in the war is something known as the Zimmerman Telegram. This is kind of the last straw for America. But basically, the Germans sent a letter to Mexico asking Mexico to attack America. In return, Germany said when they win, they would give back California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas back to Mexico. The problem was the Mexicans never got the letter because the British and the Americans intercepted the letter and said, hey, look what Germany wants to do. And on April 2nd, 1917, Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war. Here we can see a picture of trench warfare. You can see these soldiers dug in, the just horrible conditions with trench warfare. You have rain, it's where you go to the bathroom, it's where you bleed, it's where you die, it's where you eat, everything all in these trenches. Here you can kind of see a little poster representing it. So here you would have, one side of the soldiers, or one side, and then the other side would be the enemy, or whatever that may be. Here in the middle is going to be called no man's land. You don't want to set foot in there. There are landmines, and it's very dangerous. But what ends up happening is you have a soldier over here who pops up, runs across, and they have a little fight right here, and then they run back and get in their tunnel. And then these guys over here pop up over, fight, run back, and that's how the war happens, and fighting happens with trench warfare. Now, here you get something known as trench foot. Your feet are wet and wet, day after day, week after week, month after month. And so you start to get blisters in your boots. And skin starts to fall off and toes start to fall off. It's a very, very painful, very disgusting, disease-ridden issue with trench warfare. You also have chemicals. Here you can see gas masks. You have the introduction of the tanks. And these were first introduced because they could climb over and crawl over these trenches without getting stuck. Here you have a boat, one of the U-boats. Here we have Wilson and his quote, "The United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name. We must be impartial in thought as well as in action, a nation that neither sits in judgment upon others nor is disturbed in her own counsels, and which keeps herself fit and free to do what is honest and disinterested and truly serviceable for the peace of the world. It's not true. We are completely involved in World War I by this point, even though he says we are neutral in fact as well as in name. Here you have some propaganda posters against Germans, the anti-German Union, British Empire Union, once a German, always a German, to not like them. Here you have the New York Times about the sinking of the Lusitania, the boat that had over 100 Americans on it that sunk thanks to the German U-boats, but is going to lead us into the war. Here you can see a drawing of the Lusitania sinking. Here we have another political cartoon. Wake up, America. Civilization calls every man, woman, and child. We can't sleep. We need to fight for our freedom. We need to fight for our independence and go from there. And then here we have the Zimmerman note. And it says, hey, between Mexico and Germany, let's make war together. Let's make peace together. Let's have generous financial support and an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territories in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. So, and this is Germany's plan. It doesn't work because Mexico never gets the letter. Here we can see a cartoon representing the Zimmerman note saying, hey, we're going to cut out this area and give it to Mexico. Now, there was a very famous song called Over There that teaches us and talks to us about the movement to try to get soldiers. So for just a second, I'm going to just let you look over those words. Spend about 30 seconds, 45 seconds looking at these words and seeing why you think they might be used as a propaganda tool or a way to convince soldiers to fight in the war. So there you can see some of the lyrics, some of the words that go along with it. Now, over there, what that entailed in 1917, we had about 200,000 soldiers involved in the war. By June 5th, 1917, we had 9.5 million Americans registered for the draft. The Allies needed bodies. They needed more bodies to be able to fight. The United States sends 1 million over. The Battle of Argonne Forest, there's 26,000 dead, 95,000 wounded. But it helps reverse the German advances, and on November 11th, 1918, Germany signs what's known as the armistice. Now, this is still a federal holiday in America, but the big kicker, and how we always know the end of World War I, is they wanted to make sure or try to prevent a second World War from happening. So what they did is they picked a date that it would be easily remembered. So, 11/11/1918 at the 11th hour. So at 11 o'clock of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918 is when they sign the agreement ending World War I. Now, 1 out of 5 U.S. soldiers were born outside of America at this time. 49 different languages of American soldiers. Remember, we've learned about the immigration patterns and the quantities of immigrants coming in, Ellis Island, Angel Island, those types of things. 400,000 African Americans fought for the war. 13% of our soldiers were African American. 25% of adult male American Indian population served in the war. 5% of them died. 50,000 died from action. 63,000 died from disease. So just as we've learned in the Civil War, disease was still a very big problem. Now, here we can see a chart that shows the casualties, the amount of people that died. If you look at France or Russia, dead, wounded, in the totals there, it's just mind-boggling to realize the amount of people that lost their lives in World War I. Now, at home, The U.S. economy was doing fantastic. There was a lot of buying, a lot of selling, jobs, growth, all these different things. Food, weapons, goods, money, all these were sent to the Allies. You also had something called the War Industries Board, and they oversaw factories to help the war production. The National War Labor Board established 8-hour workdays, equal money for women working, 1.5 times of overtime. So they're trying to give the workers more money for the work that they are doing, but still be able to accomplish their task of sending supplies over there. Railroad administration took over the railroads to help facilitate the movement of troops and equipment. So the federal government is taking charge in a lot of regards to make sure that things are done. The food administration implemented rations. So you would have like wheatless Mondays and porkless Thursdays and days where you would avoid certain foods so that the excess food could be sent to the soldiers. Here you have some political cartoons or posters. Food, don't waste it. We are saving you, you save food. Well-fed soldiers will win the war. So instead of throwing away food, take less on your plate so that the soldiers can have more mentality. Now, the Committee on Public Information was created in America to help build up and gain popular support for the war. They created something known as the American Protective League. There were over 250,000 agents, or these were just people who would help spy on their neighbors and coworkers and say they support Germany or those types of things. The Sedition Act of 1918, if you know, we've kind of already talked about some of these things before. The Sedition Act of 1918 prohibited any words or behavior that might incite, provoke, or encourage resistance to the United States or promote the cause of its enemies. So we've talked about this before. John Adams did this in the early 1800s, and this idea of doing away with the First Amendment or pausing it for a while. You also had something called the Great Migration. There were over 400,000 African Americans who moved specifically north to the big cities for factory jobs. So many of them had lived in the South. Yes, they're free. Civil War's been done for quite a while now, but they're trying to get a better life, and moving north is going to see that. Between 1917 and 1920, over 100,000 Americans come to America to fill those jobs. 1 million women entered the workforce. So that's all going on here in America and how things are changing. So help Uncle Sam stamp out the Kaiser, buy U.S. government bonds so you can see the soldier's foot stomping on him. The sedition bills, honest opinion, free speech, free press, those types of things were limited. So here we have the Great Migration. We can see the arrows from the south heading up to the north. Now, what else was going on in America during this time, specifically during World War I? You had the National American Women's Suffrage Association that had 2 million members as part of it. Its president was a woman by the name of Carrie Chapman Catt, and they wanted to prove their patriotism to win the ballot. They supported the war effort, and ultimately, in 1920, as you can see at the bottom of the slide there, the 19th Amendment is going to pass. You also had something called the National Women's Party with Alice Paul. Confrontational approach, they would have protests, but it's all saying, look, the men have gone off to war, the women have stepped in their place, we need to be treated equally. We need to be fair. We need to get these votes. We need to do those things. 1918, President Wilson urged support for women's suffrage as a war measure. We need these women to vote because they are supporting us in the war. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that ended the war. And part of this treaty had a hope for this thing called the 14 points. It was President Wilson's ideas to ensure peace throughout the world forever. He wanted open diplomacy. He wanted freedom upon the seas, arms reduction, removal of trade barriers, League of Nations. Britain and France were going to be split up Germany's African territories. So Germany's kind of paying some consequences here. And they also need to pay $33 billion in reparations. And they are mad. The end of World War I is going to lead to World War II. Okay, and a lot of this is right here. We have the Treaty of Versailles, which ultimately is going to set up conditions for future bloodshed. It's going to set up Germany being upset, other countries wanting more, and going to lead to World War II. Here you have Germany being, the peace terms are being shoved down their throat, and here you can see out of the Versailles Treaty is going to come Hitler and his party, and it's going to lead to some bad things. Ultimately, though, President Wilson, as bad as he wanted this 14 points and wanted this treaty, Republicans held the majority in the Senate, and they said, no, we are not going to support this. Wilson went on a speaking tour to try to promote it, but ultimately the treaty died, and Wilson also died in 1924. Now, the United States turned back on the world when it rejected Versailles, but we took Hawaii, Philippines, we've exerted our power in Latin America, we've gotten involved in Asia, and we are thoroughly involved in the world and its problems. And so that is how America emerges as a world power, Chapter 21, 1890 to 1918.